In the middle of July 1918, Imperial German forces reached the high water mark of their spring offensive with the Second Battle of the Marne. However, they failed to achieve a breakthrough, and the subsequent Allied counterstroke, commencing on July 18th, forced the Germans to spend the rest of the month retreating from their games in Champagne and left them scrambling to form a new defensive line. On August 3rd, the U.S. 4th Division, which had just been rotated into the line, was ordered to pursue German units retreating north towards the Velle River. The 39th Infantry Regiment led the left half of the division's advance. Opposing the 39th was the German 89th Mecklenburg Grenadier Regiment of the 17th Infantry Division. This was one of the best units in the German army and a veteran of 4 years of battles on the Western Front. However, as a spearhead unit in the German Kaiserschlacht offensive earlier that year, the division suffered heavy casualties and had been recovering behind the lines for much of the summer. In comparison, the only combat experience the 39th Regiment had was as a supporting element to a French attack 2 weeks earlier. It had been held in reserve ever since. The 39th spent August 3rd navigating dense woods and overcoming some limited resistance given by the Grenadiers. Late that evening, they reached the wooded heights to the south of the village of St. Thibaut. At midnight and in heavy rain, their advance was finally stopped by sustained German shelling of the route of advance, and the lead battalions fell out along the road to catch what little rest they could. The German troops had taken the opportunity to withdraw across the Velle, and contact with them was lost. Early the next morning on the 4th, 39th Regiment resumed their pursuit with the same column formation it had adopted the day prior. 2nd Battalion and its 4 companies formed the advance party in support. 3rd Battalion with its companies, plus the Regimental Machine Gun Company, formed the reserve. However, German shelling of the intended route continued unabated, and so the decision was made to countermarch to a nearby road that ran directly into St. Thibaut. The disruption caused by this abrupt change of plans resulted in a gap opening up between the front and back 2 companies of 2nd Battalion, which 3rd Battalion advanced directly into. Time was of the essence, and rather than suffering the delays that an attempt to untangle these knots would bring, the roles of the column were simply reassigned instead. H Company led the way as the advance party, with companies F, K, and L following in support. I, M, E, and G companies, together with the Regimental Machine Gun Company, would now form the reserve of the column. The foliage and slopes to either side of this new route blocked hostile observation, and thus the advancing troops were sheltered from further German artillery fire. This newfound sense of security, together with the inexperience of the soldiers, and certainly not helped by the organizational confusion, led to the adoption of a standard formation familiar from the training ground. The soldiers of H Company at the head of the column marched 2 across, and the 3 companies in support followed in a column of squads, or 4 men across. The column continued as H Company made its way out of the defile and into the open stretch of land in front of the village, in full view of the high ground north of the Velle. Still, no artillery greeted their arrival. By 8 o'clock, H Company had pressed forward through the village, and the support companies were taking their turn crossing the open field several hundred meters to the south. Had the Germans simply continued their retreat and left the heights opposite the river undefended? No, this was not the case. Just as H Company reached the northern outskirts of St. Thibaut, a storm of German artillery and machine gun fire opened up on the unwary column, and it was thrown into disorder with heavy casualties. In the words of one Captain Manton Eddy, who was present as the commander of the 39th Machine Gun Company, the Americans in their dense marching columns were a sight that must have made the German artillery observers gasp in amazement, for before them lay an artilleryman's dream. Despite their confusion, the affected companies quickly recovered from the German backhand and dug themselves into less vulnerable positions astride the road. However, it was clear that the Germans intended to stand and fight. Assuming the Germans were following their standard playbook for defense in depth, as much as 1 battalion of infantry held the village of Bazoches and the front slopes to its rear. Their artillery had been skillfully sighted in on St. Thibaut and the surrounding area, and they had similarly positioned machine guns to cover the approaches to both villages. Overcoming such a formidable defensive scheme would require both planning and artillery fire on the part of the Americans. Lacking both, however, the 39th's advance had been stopped in its tracks. The fight to cross the Vel, however, had just begun.